Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Marelle Schuberth, three-time experienced gestational surrogate and intake manager for Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor, where our aim is a safe, enjoyable, ethical surrogacy journey for all. Today, I am very excited to welcome attorney Lesa Slaughter, Esquire of Slaughter Law Group. Lesa opened her practice in 2009 after navigating her own journey to motherhood via gestational surrogacy, specializing in third-party reproduction. And today's topic is going to be birthright citizenship and surrogacy. Lesa is going to explain what birthright citizenship is, how it currently applies to children born via surrogacy in the U.S., and what changes could mean for the industry. So thank you for joining us today, Lesa. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you the perfect person to talk to about birthright citizenship and surrogacy?
Well, thank you, Marelle. I wouldn't say I'm the perfect person, but I'm certainly an informed person and attorney who's vigorously following this particular issue, which could have such a big impact on the surrogacy industry. So let me start by telling you, as you mentioned, I'm an attorney, started I was practicing law before in a big corporate setting and decided to, when I realized I had infertility issues, my husband at the time and I consulted an IVF doctor, said, hey, sorry, surrogacy is the only way for you to start your family. And that began our journey. And I found that area of law so moving, very fast moving, moving emotionally and very fast moving in terms of laws and policy. It's something that wanting to have a child is a fundamental human nature. And I was blessed to be at a time where the technology was available to do that in a way that worked for my former husband and I. So through that journey, I decided to focus on gestational surrogacy, representing both surrogates and intended parents, most of which are international because surrogacy is outlawed and illegal in most countries around the world, as we know. And egg donors, egg donation, intended parents, embryo donors, embryo intended parents. So that's the scope of the practice. And I've represented now almost close to 3,000 clients and helped them become and create families, which is great. It's fabulous. So anyway.
That's wonderful. And we need more people like you who have that specialty. We've done previous podcasts where we've mentioned that having an attorney who specializes in reproductive and family law in your state is essential. And we've really dived into why that is so essential, why your cousin's brother, Mark, who does real estate law, should not be the one executing your surrogacy agreement, international IPs or not. And so we definitely need more attorneys in your field, and we appreciate the awesome work.
That will say to any intended parent is consult an attorney before you even pick an agency. You want to make sure that agency, depending on where you live, if you're international in particular, that it's going to allow for you to create, and the topic of today is citizenship, and it's going to impact really international intended parents. So contact an attorney before you pick an agency. A good attorney will provide you with a free 15-minute consultation, and that can save you literally tens of thousands of dollars. I'm working with intended parents now who are from Japan, and the Japanese process is the first of how are you going to take that child home and get Japanese citizenship is the first thing that we talk about, because that's got to be reflected in the legal component, because who wants to take your child to your country where they're going to be raised and have to worry about getting citizenship for the child in that country? So that's a really, really key consideration. And good experienced surrogacy attorneys, which I like to think of myself as, if I may, will have a network of international attorneys that understand surrogacy and actually can help facilitate and answer and work with your U.S. counsel to make sure that that's all taken care of. So anyway, with that said, let's talk about citizenship and the fabulous 14th Amendment, which is every person born in the United States is automatically given United States citizenship. It's not necessarily by genetics. It's not necessarily by where your parents are from or what citizenship they hold. So that's
Mhm.
the process. President Trump has said through an executive order, which he signed in January and which has been going through the courts and will continue to go through the courts. This podcast will probably age out in, 5 or 6 months.
Yep.
Um, Said via executive order, no, not going to do that anymore. In order to become an American citizen, it's not about where you're born, it's about who you're born to. So your parents have to be American citizens. And I'm oversimplifying a little bit for the audience, but just to put it in layman's terms. So you need to be American citizens. Well, regardless of what you think about that as an immigration policy or citizenship policy, let's
Mhm.
talk about the impact on the surrogacy industry. So, most intended parents, in fact, almost all intended parents, I should say, who are international, which is the majority, I think, of what we're seeing coming to the United States these
Mhm.
days, are citizens of another country. So they're coming here on a tourist visa typically, or maybe, a business visa or some kind of temporary permission by the United States government to enter and stay into the country for a very specific time, right? It's not
Mhm.
unlimited amount of time. So that means the way surrogacy works, particularly in pre birth states, meaning states that allow you to provide a pre birth order in surrogacy, declaring that the surrogate, and if she's married, her husband, are not the parents of any child born through the surrogate, that they have no rights whatsoever. California being the state with by far the best tried and true law, both by case law and by statute, makes that very clear, and it's been enforceable. And our statute found to be constitutional, so no issue there.
Yep.
Now, the problem becomes I get this pre-birth order and it says that Susie and Johnny or Johnny and Timmy are the intended parents and they don't have American citizenship. So if this amendment to the if this change to the 14th Amendment were to occur, you would have a countryless child because they could not obtain a US passport. You need a passport or some sort of citizenship to enter another country.
Mhm.
So you've got a child that's literally sitting in limbo. You also would have a federal government that would be probably overwhelmed because you would be having to verify the citizenship of every person who came in wanting a passport for a newborn, a
Yep.
newborn. Now, there's been talk about, well, the surrogate is a US citizen. Okay. Applying that may really set back the industry, and there's a lot of risk with that because legally she's really not. So, according to the surrogacy contract, and
Mhm.
each state and the states that allow surrogacy, or almost every state says they have a process to say whether it's by contract and by pre or post birth order as well,
Yep.
says that the surrogate is absolutely not the child's parent.
Yep.
So that's a very difficult workaround. So
Yep.
that's the look and the impact of what would happen if this is applied, if it's found
So
to
talk
be
a little bit about the
constitutional, et cetera.
process now. Like if nothing changes,
Yes.
we you mentioned, pre-birth orders and parentage orders in certain states. So if like if nothing changes as of now, what does the kind of birthright and citizenship look like to get these international babies home to their intended parents and their place of birth? Like what does it look like now so we can kind of compare what the changes would
Yes.
be?
Let me talk about where we are in the court system now, because obviously a number of states and some individuals, none of which are surrogacy related, have said, no, no, you can't just by executive order change the Constitution or amendments to the Constitution. And this should be declared There should be a nationwide injunction, an injunction being something that says, a court says, stop what you're doing. We're going to
Mhm.
decide whether or not this is legal, what's being asked. So a group of approximately 22 states, I believe, don't quote me on that number, sued in federal court and said, stop. This won't work. We want the court to apply this injunction nationwide to every state, even the states that did not come in our lawsuit, and stop this. Okay. And let's hear it on the merits. Let's hear if it's constitutional first before you start applying it, because applying it's going to go nuts.
Yep.
So the Supreme Court a few months ago said, well, you can't have a nationwide injunction. So unless, and this gets a little complicated, so unless a group comes in as a class action and we get a nationwide injunction, then we're going to pause the application of this, which means foreign intended parents have no issue. They come in, the child is born on U.S. soil, the child gets a U.S. passport, right? By right, no
Mhm.
issue. So that's the status right now because there was a class action, a nationwide class was certified. So every single state, there's an injunction. Now, that injunction may be challenged, right? So ultimately, that's a process that we will see we'll see going forward. The big issue about the injunction is let's stop the application of what this executive order is, and let's get to whether or not this is constitutional. I
Mhm.
can certainly make a guess, and I think based on the constitutional knowledge that I have and listening to, more importantly, constitutional scholars, the majority think this will not pass constitutional muster.
Yep.
The typical way, just so everybody knows, this is your government lesson for the month, is the way that you amend the Constitution is you have to have 2/3 vote in the Senate and Congress and Senate. Okay, and or you can go, and I was just reviewing this because I remember this I'm old enough to remember the Equal Rights Amendment that unfortunately didn't pass, it's by a convention that's called by 2/3 of the states, and then it's got to be ratified by 3/4 of the states.
Yep.
That is a big lift to make if
Yep.
that goes to constitutional convention and ratification. So,
Yep.
and we'll see after the midterms if that happens, where the majority is. So it's the point being is that without getting caught in the minutia, which I apologize of going into just to set the framework, is we won't know this likely until the fall what the status is.
Yep.
So in the interim, there is no pause. There is no issue. There is no concern.
Yep.
So the question becomes, what's the court going to do and how we'll do that workaround? And frankly, the majority of the professionals, and there was a big Zoom call, I think about a month and a half ago on this issue on how to deal with it.
Yep.
Because you do have pre-birth orders, you do have post-birth orders.
Yep.
Do you do a post-birth order? What is the workaround?
Yep.
And, there are some concerns that any kind of workaround could really run afoul of the federal law and be fraudulent and have a massive impact on the child, the intended parents, their ability to be here.
Yep.
So the intent of the law was not to impact surrogacy. That's my belief, right?
Yep.
Because these children are leaving,
Yeah,
right?
that's
They're not.
one of the we've kind of noticed this with a few different things from the current administration is that for the blanket, like they're not necessarily talking about surrogacy born children as quote anchor babies or whatever this big controversial point of birthright citizenship is. Surrogacy kind of falls into this gray area sex that not many people think about when these laws go in. And I think it's way more far reaching than you would think. Because I will say, I've been a surrogate 3 times. 2 out of 3 of my intended parents were international. And I knew a little bit more with my last one I ended up going to the embassy and renouncing my relation to the baby so she could get her Israeli citizenship before she got
Yes.
her American one. But I never really thought so much about it. And even in the news, when you hear about this birthright citizenship, nobody thinks about surrogacy born children whose intent never was to be here. It's they need that parentage to leave here. And I think this is very interesting that I never really paid too much attention, having done this a couple of times. I should be more informed about how it works and why these things do affect us. And that's what I love about doing these types of podcasts is I get to learn along with everybody else kind of what this potential impact is.
But you raise a really good point. I've had a lot of Israeli intended couples and usually a post-birth order, and then they can go to the consulate or the embassy, Israeli
Mhm.
consulate or embassy. And what's interesting is what I haven't investigated because I don't know that they've really focused on it is what are consulates and embassies going to do? For example, Israeli couple doesn't necessarily need a U.S. passport. They can go straight to the Israeli consulate and, because of the way Israeli citizenship works, obtain that.
Yep.
I've had couples do that from Sweden, where it goes straight to that. And they could do this in the US, and there may be workarounds, more importantly, in those consulates and embassies for those children, because it could apply to other areas. And the surrogacy industry in general has wanted to, at least the lobbying component, to the extent that that exists through the legal associations, has really been not wanted to raise its head on this issue, has not wanted to join in the lawsuits, really wants to keep this low on the radar. And I think in particular now, there's a recent, really horrible case going on in Los Angeles with a surrogacy agency that really duped a number of surrogates. So I think the negative view right now on that particular case is, I mean, it's been in the Wall Street Journal, it's been I've seen it in the London press. It's been all over the world. Surrogacy is it's a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people think it's from the baby M case where you're using the surrogate's egg that's no longer needed because of
Mhm.
IVF and egg donation, and egg retrieval, the advancement in that particular area. So that's where we are with the U.S. birthright citizenship, which is basically still up in the air, but it's paused. That's really great. That's really great. So
Yep.
again, I think consulting with an attorney if you're an international intended parent, and let's talk to the immigration folks in your country and say, hey, maybe we can go to, for example, the Japanese embassy or the German embassy, which I've had to go representing a surrogate, actually, in the German consulate, actually in Los Angeles. Let's go. Let's try that route, and it doesn't matter what birthright citizenship is.
Yeah. But that definitely adds an extra step. Like I know I volunteered to do it so they could get back home and start their lives after I had a C-section. I had to fly to Atlanta because that was the closest consulate. And I mean, it was a quick, easy thing. I just had to, sign papers that it adds
That's a
parts
lot
it adds
after a
parts to the
C-section.
process. And so I think just for intended parents and surrogates, kind of what advice or comfort do we have that like, okay, even some current surrogates who are pregnant now while this is all up in the air, like what, is there a way to separate out the surrogacy from the other forms of birthright citizenship, or are we all encompassing and need to figure out how to get administration to understand the deeper implications? It's not just people crossing the border to have kids here.
I I think to answer your question, I don't know. I mean, a lot of legislation has unintended consequences, right?
Mhm.
For impacts on groups or industries that couldn't be foreseen or weren't really, frankly, thought about, or that particular industry or group of people didn't necessarily come in and lobby and say, hey, just before you pass this, just know this is really significantly adversely affect us.
Mhm.
And don't forget, surrogacy. When intended parents come international, and we have a huge medical tourism in surrogacy, we have it internationally, and that it brings a tremendous amount of money into the United States, not just California, but all over for IVF
Mhm.
physicians, etc. So this is gonna be a really big deal if it is found to be constitutional. So I think the real what I would recommend and what I'm recommending to my intended parents is let's talk to the local consulate. First let's talk to an immigration attorney in your country. Right?
Mhm.
Israel, I know, I'm in touch with a number of attorneys there, that's pretty easy. Sweden, easy. Some of them we've done this before, because I frequently will advise intended parents, get your citizenship. This is when US citizenship was not an issue. Get your
Mhm.
US passport and go get your Swedish um citizenship for the child here in the US. I'll tell you why, because they've probably dealt with more surrogacy cases and they
Mhm.
know it's not gonna be something where you're gonna have a bureaucrat in your home, a small city if you come from, go, "Oh my gosh, I've never seen this. I need a bajillion pieces of paper to prove that this is really true."
Oh yeah,
Right?
and then certain countries and certain states even have that kind of non-biological parent claim parentage for same-sex couples and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it in general. So to just add this extra hurdle is definitely got some people
Exactly.
nervous of what's to come. And so, what are some key questions that you think international intended parents should ask their attorney during this consultation?
Well, the good attorney will bring it up to you, but if they don't, talk about citizenship for the child. What does that look like in the current climate? Who do you work with, Lisa, in our country that you would recommend if they haven't already come through? And a lot of times they will have come with their own local counsel. I frequently find that in Israel, and also I have a lot of clients from Australia.
Okay.
And even the laws in New South Wales just changed on surrogacy. So, working with amendments now to the contract. For example, with my recent clients, I want to make sure, and you want to ask as an intended parent, or I'll tell you honestly what I ask is, do you have anybody locally? If you don't, let's find you somebody and let me meet with them. Just have a quick
Mhm.
consult. It's the money that you spend is going to be well worth it because you
Yes,
won't have
and this
any
is all
issues. And
before even finding an agency or surrogate, correct? Let's get
abs-
all these ducks in a row beforehand. Is that what I'm hearing is your common thread?
Absolutely, because we need to know if you've got a same-sex couple where one is not gonna be the biological parent, then we need to make sure that you're in a state that we
Yep.
can get both parents on the birth certificate and not have to go through an adoption, right?
Yep.
Make it, clear. How can we amend the birth certificate if we need to? Make sure that that process, because going through an adoption in states is not that's not practical. Right,
Yep.
that doesn't work. You don't you're vetted, you have to be a resident in some states for an extended period of time. That's just not gonna work, so you wanna make
Yep.
sure that that's really clear. So, again, consult the attorney before. Please, before it's very hard to undo these things, okay?
Yep.
Please,
Yep.
please, foreign intended parents. So, is if they don't have somebody local, we'll find somebody in their home country because I want to make sure that the surrogacy contract has all the requirements needed. For example, with my Israeli clients, I make sure that it says in there the surrogate is agreeing to go to the consulate, the closest consulate, paid by the intended parents or what have you, to the extent that she's available. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to travel after a C-section, but, if they can,
Yep.
like you mean you did it really well.
Yep.
Obviously, that was really fabulous. So, and make sure that's in the contract. We had something come up with the new law in New South Wales, and I worked with an Australian attorney there, and we just did an amendment,
Yep.
right? So, even if laws change, we can do an amendment to the surrogacy
Yep.
contract.
But
So, those are the key questions. Make sure that you have somebody local. If not, make sure your attorney's experienced enough to have worked across the world with intended parents. And I've
mhm.
literally had from Africa to um, Brazil to, I mean, every letter of the alphabet with the exception of Antarctica, I have represented clients. So I have contacts in those particular areas. And if I
Yep.
don't, then I know other attorneys that do, right? Through the
Yep.
network of third-party fertility specialist attorneys.
Yep.
And then when you're picking your agency, you know you have a parameter. We need a surrogate from these states,
Yep.
right? Because so many more surrogates and states are opening up to surrogacy.
Mhm.
We need a surrogate from this state. For example, even in the U.S., I had a client, California based, but they are in the surrogates in Tennessee. They're using an embryo that's not of their genetic creation, which Tennessee will not allow. Tennessee will
Yep.
not recognize the parentage of those intended parents. Tennessee has a biological connection.
Yep.
And if you don't, you have to go through an adoption process, which again is not practical. So, unfortunately, this came to me a bit after the fact. So we were able to do a workaround to where the surrogate, who luckily, thank you, was right at the Kentucky border. So she's going to give birth in Kentucky.
Yep.
So we circumvented the Tennessee genetic issue. But
Yep.
again, if that person had known beforehand and had come beforehand in terms of, hey, here's our genetic material and here's where a surrogate that we really want lives,
Yep.
I would have said, okay, well, here's the obstacles and make sure you have insurance that's going to cover her delivery in Kentucky, right?
Yep.
So there are a lot of moving parts with this. And
Yep.
it's
So kind of as
really
it stands,
important.
I know, a lot of times intended parents won't talk to an attorney until it's time to sign legal contracts. Once
I
they
know.
already have a surrogate and has been in screening and okay, they've passed medical, now it's time for legal. And then they get to you and you're like, wait, we don't even know if the surrogate can deliver and get you your baby. So it sounds like before. And I think that's a big takeaway just in general for legal in surrogacy for intended parents, but especially now for international intended parents as we navigate kind of these new citizenship and birthright laws, that it really is essential.
Especially because, intended parents, listen, it's a very expensive journey. Having gone through it, it's very expensive, right?
Hmm.
It is not, it is, it's, and it's gotten just more expensive, right?
Yep,
As
it's
all
it's
prices
been
have risen,
yep,
right? I did it, quite some time ago. So the prices, and then you add insurance and insurance for the children and everything else. So I understand why intended parents want to save on legal. I think agencies do a disservice by not having and saying to intended parents, hey, have this agency agreement looked at by an attorney specializing in this area, because a lot of intended parents, even with the agency, don't realize, well, wait a minute, what if my surrogate doesn't pass medical? Do I get my money back? No, you
yep,
don't. You get a rematch for most agencies, which might be
hmm
great, but if that agency doesn't have a lot of surrogates, how long are you going to be waiting?
yep,
Just considerations like that. Because agency fees have gone up, and really, understanding how they match and what questions to ask a surrogate,
yep,
right? I mean, what I provide are practical insights having been an intended parent. So I think that's unique. There aren't very many of us who've been intended parents and are attorneys specializing in this. So,
yep,
I can tell you what it's like in the contract, as you know, it says that the intended parents can be in the delivery room, right? With
hmm
obvious respect, right? For the surrogate's modesty and her own personal desires.
hmm
And that if the hospital says, you know what, sorry, it's too crowded, we're doing emergency C, whatever, the surrogate gets to pick her support person that's going to be with her, which I think is natural, right?
yep,
Well, that means the intended parents would be excluded, not because the surrogate said that, but because the hospital is saying that. That
yep,
happened to us, right? So it was a C-section, a small room or what have you. Here's how we worked it out. Here's what we did, right?
yep,
So I can give you that practical advice and what to
yep,
ask your surrogate, right?
yep,
And what to ask your IVF physician when she is looking and reviewing a surrogate and really understanding that medical clearance process.
yep,
So again, it's kind of like, would you arrive in a city and just start looking around, or would you consult a map? You'd probably consult a map before you went outside of your
Yep.
hotel and started walking, right?
Yeah.
So, instead of just having everything by chance in a Google search.
Yep.
So, that's what a good attorney can do for you who specializes in this space.
Yep.
That was a long-winded answer.
No, but that's what it is that's what we are trying to get out here is it is the advice because you don't know what you don't know until you're in the thick of it, and that's what we love about this podcast is being able to share firsthand experiences, accounts, advice from people who've been there and done that, and who every story is different, every journey is different, but hearing how other people's journeys in general work, especially from a professional like yourself who has personally and professionally navigated it. It just really helps us kind of see the bigger picture, which is important because, again, you don't know what you don't know. And that's what we try to do with Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor is really empower both intended parents and surrogates with information so they can go into these to have those safe ethical journeys without hiccups, without becoming a nightmare case. And a lot of it is just kind of changing how the industry looks at things as policies change and as things change. And so I think that's a great piece of advice to do beforehand because I noticed, at least for me as a surrogate, I got, once I got to my medical, that's when I was assigned legal. And I think that is very common for a lot of agencies as well for intended parents is kind of having that process start afterwards. So I think getting that consult in is a great
It It's funny because I got after so many years, I finally just realized and started looking out there for books that would maybe do this, and there aren't any, and I'm writing one, and hopefully I can come back on the podcast and kinda wave it around,
yeah, we'd love
for
to see it.
intended parents. It's called An Insider's Guide to, Surrogacy by an attorney and parent who's been there, who's been in
Yep.
in those shoes. And I think a roadmap because a lot of people just walk out of the IVF doctors,
Yeah.
and no fault of the IVF doctors. They're busy. They just turn you over to a third party coordinator and
Yep.
say, "Hey, call us back when you have a surrogate."
Well, and there are so
So
many different intricacies in a journey alone, let alone, your legal contract, which literally has to plan for every one of those contingencies. So there's no question in the moment of what happens. And so you think, okay, as a surrogate, I'm just going to go get pregnant. It's going to be good. But that attorney on both ends really need to make sure that every scenario is very clearly laid out and agreed upon so that you don't have these sticky situations. And that's really another huge part of ethical surrogacy is making sure that those contracts are clear, understood, and all encompassing for all the things, not just the good things, so that everybody kind of knows what they're
I
getting into.
sorry, you make a great point, which is that your surrogacy contract is your instruction manual.
Yep.
If something breaks down, you wanna know who's responsible to fix it, who pays for it, and who gets to make the call.
Yep.
Right? At the end of the day, there's
Yep.
a lot of money, there's a lot of hope, there's someone's a woman's life is potentially on the line, just
Yep.
things happen. Women do become disabled and die from giving birth. It's
Well,
rare
that and
these days
you want to make sure you
with
understand
modern.
everything. I've had some very thorough contracts. I've had some that for on the surrogate side was like I had to say that I would always wear my seatbelt. I wouldn't jaywalk. I wouldn't exceed. So some of them are very specific with things like that, but then kind of leave out some of the bigger things like there'll only be a couple of different termination things listed. I'm like, okay, but we went way into how I can walk across the street and my attorney brought that up. Like, we need to like beef up some more of this. So you don't know what you don't know. And it's just, having that guidebook. That's what I always say. I'm like, think about it like a play, your playbook. It will literally talk about everything from your disbursements, how you're paid, when you're paid, what triggers those automatic payments, down to travel restriction. I mean, it has it all, or at least it should, because you should have a reference and there should be nothing left to question. So it really should be all in there. So I think that is, we always try to pour home how important the
Uh,
proper legal representation is in those first contracts. And so I know this may be a loaded question with a non-answer, but we're going to ask it anyways. What type of contingency plan can pregnant surrogates and or intended parents have during the time of pause where nothing's really happening, but things could shift at any minute? Um, is there a type of plan that they have, or you just gotta kind of wait and see, and we
well,
will take it from there?
it is a loaded question and well done, and it is one I don't have a complete answer for, but
Yeah.
what I'm suggesting my clients do is let's start talking and figuring out how we can get you citizenship for that child from day one and just forget about US citizenship,
Yep.
right? So you can always go back and apply for it if it's found to be, not constitutional,
Mhm.
unconstitutional. And let's do it that way, right? Let's see what the process is. Is it DNA? With some, it's DNA testing. With some, it may be the surrogate signing forms, notarizing forms post birth. For your circumstances with your Israeli intended parents, it was going to the consulate. So let's forget that layer and
Yep.
go straight to your country and see what we can do from there. How is the
Yep.
consulate going to handle it? Because,
Yep.
I mean, hopefully consulates have thought about it, right? I
Yep.
mean, you will be issued a birth certificate that shows that they were born in the US and shows you as intended parents. That's not an issue at all.
Yep.
It's really just that citizenship. So if you're a surrogate, ask your foreign intended parents, have they spoken to their attorney in case this happens?
Yep. And I think, like, get your plan B set up to be plan A from the start. I think that's, or at least knowing that what the
Exactly,
options are
because,
and what steps need to be taken, so that way it's not like, "Uh-oh, she's in labor, what do we do now?" And at least knowing what that phase would be, I think is some great advice. Um, and let's see, like, as we kind of come to the close, anything else that you think that we should know about, parentage of, international intended parents and birthright citizenship, possible changes and or impacts that, we
I
haven't
would,
discussed?
if I was an intended parent, in addition, and you're already in contract, right, and you haven't just started the process, then what I would do is make sure that you talk to your attorney and talk to your agency too. And hopefully your agency, I communicate with some agencies about, hey, what's going on.
Mhm.
Um, some agencies aren't particularly focused on it, which I think is not great. I mean, I think you should focus on topical issues that could impact the end of the journey of intended parents just as much as you do the start of the journey, right? And
Yep.
the matching process.
Yep.
So those two things are what to do. And as a surrogate, talk to your agency, and talk to your intended parents. Your attorney may not necessarily and isn't particularly involved in that, and the child won't be yours, right? It will be declared the parents. Sorry, the child of the intended parents.
Mhm.
So that's what a surrogate can do, and that's what intended parents can do who are in the process now, who are about to have an embryo transfer, or have already have a legal contract, or are about to have their surrogate, give birth.
Yep.
So and don't take no for an answer,
Yep.
right?
Just
Don't take no for
ask
an
the
answer.
questions and get the plan B going. I think that is.
Exactly, exactly. Because hopefully with some of the countries it'll be pretty easy. Some of the
Mhm.
countries it may take additional time. So if that's a particular case, maybe we apply for a different visa that allows you to stay longer. Maybe it's exact. I mean, so there are ways to do it, but don't do it yourself. Do not do it yourself. Do it
Yep.
with the team of professionals that you've hired for this journey.
Yep, and don't do it last minute.
No, and don't do it
Don't
last
do it
minute.
last minute. Have that plan, ahead of time, and I think that is the best way. There's always a way, and it just goes so much more smoothly. It's, again, like that contract. It's another one of those contingencies that you should have. I think we had an attorney on here who said that. She's like, "Oh no, I get paid to think of worst case scenario and put it on paper and make sure it's addressed," which it is. You want to make sure that all of those scenarios, best case and worst case, are clearly defined and established as much as you can prior to
Well,
anything
yeah,
happening, so there's no scramble.
Well, you raise another good point, and I am sometimes I say to my clients, I hate to be Debbie Downer, but that's part of my responsibility is to tell you what your risks are.
Yep.
And the good news is that, the biggest risk obviously is to the surrogate's physical health.
Mhm.
And that's typically disability or death. So, for surrogates, definitely ask for the highest limit possible for life insurance. Surrogates are young, they have young families.
Yep.
And it's very much, I urge my intended parents to say, it's for a few $100s more. You can give several $100,000 more in life insurance. And
Yep.
also, there's a permanent disability insurance that's available for surrogacy. And that's something to definitely, I wish more agencies would really look at and put as part of their benefit package. So, as a surrogate, ask for that. How can you be protected? And it helps protect the intended parents from wrongful death lawsuits or a disability lawsuit or what have you. I mean, again, if it's uh, if it's caused by a third party, maybe medical malpractice, she can still sue the doctor, or sue the
Mhm.
hospital, or what have you. But then also have some money from this disability policy if it turns out the underwriter believes the disability is applies.
Yep. Yep. So, I mean, as of the airing and recording of this episode, we are in pause, right? As far as when did you say the next kind of hearing
I
on this, the unpause
I
button may be lifted?
I think we'll see something closer to the fall,
Okay.
um, October, and we'll see. I mean, this stuff could happen, of course, sooner, but I think we'll have a better idea of this, of the pause. But and it'll give more intended parents the opportunity.
Mm.
I want to urge international parents that are thinking of coming to the U.S. that there is a solution to this, that I mentioned in terms of dealing with the citizenship directly with the consulate, making arrangements for, okay, say the consulate needs DNA testing. Okay, let's identify where you're going to get your DNA testing,
Yep.
with the child as soon as the child's born, right?
Yep.
Let's not run around looking for a DNA place, right? Let's get it done the day or two after or the day of, or the day or two after the birth, right? It's a
Yep.
swab
Yep.
typically.
So
So that's the planning for it.
plan. Yep. No, and I think that's wonderful. And it sounds like we will have you back on in a couple of months once the play button has been hit on all things birthright citizenship, and it sounds like you'll have your book ready to go, and we can talk a little
Hopefully,
bit about
yes.
that then as well. And so, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I want to thank our very special guest, Lesa Slaughter Esquire of Slaughter Law Group, for joining us for this chat today. Be sure to check
Thank
us out
you.
online at surrogacymentor.com and modernparentmentor.com if you are interested in knowing whether surrogacy is right for you, and take our 2-minute easy quiz on our website if you're interested in becoming a surrogate. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.